Hello and welcome to Deprogram, the new Culture Forum show focused on fighting back against ideological conformity, particularly among the young. I am Connor Tomlinson, a lead contributor at Courage Media, standing in for your usual host, Harrison Pitt, as he's off gallivanting around the world. But fear not, we have new Culture Forum favourite, commentator, frequently seen at GB News and in the Mail, Charlie Downs, joining me as a co-host today. And our guest is Will Yarwood, the media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Trying to save us all a lot of money, thank you very much. Will, people that maybe don't need to be saved money, but would rather their money be spent on the services that they expect are the people of Birmingham at the moment.
Yes, indeed.
Because they are waist deep in rubbish. The entire city has become a rat utopia. Yesterday, they had a council meeting where someone showed up in a rat costume.
That was this morning. That was this morning. Yeah, it was this morning. It was fantastic. Yeah. Roland, his name is Roland the Rat, turned up to a council meeting this morning and was praising the council because all of his family is now getting really well fed by the people of Birmingham due to the amount of rubbish on the streets.
Yes. So why is this happening? As far as I know, the local council is trying to cut money, at least this is what the union is claiming, about £8,000 from 150 bin collection employees.
Yeah.
And this has been going on since March. Is there any sign of this alleviating? And why don't the local MPs seem to care much about it?
Yeah, so, bankrupt Birmingham has turned into biohazard Birmingham. I'm sure you guys have seen the footage. I mean, it's genuinely pretty disgusting. I don't think people in our generation have seen something like this for a long time. I mean, I know people older than us like to talk about the 1970s, but this is just one little microcosm of what that actually could look like in the long run. In regards to what's actually happening, it's actually to do with an equal pay dispute. So in 2012, various members of who were working for the Birmingham City Council took them to court over an equal pay dispute, mainly because they were seeing cooks and cleaners and people who were predominantly in female roles, so to speak, were being paid less than bin men, people driving lorries, things like that. And thanks to our good friend, the 2010 Equality Act, the Supreme Court said yes, go for it, which meant that Birmingham City Council had to do back pay for those workers and also make sure that those wages were aligned in the future. It's cost Birmingham City Council about £1 billion, and that's not a short chunk of change. And they issued a Section 114 notice. For those who don't know, that's when a council goes bankrupt and says, we haven't got any money. Their leading cause behind that Section 114 notice was that equal pay liability. And also the problem is they couldn't actually raise the wages of the female workers as much as they wanted to. So in order to find a little bit of money, they actually cut the money from bin men, right? And that's why they went on strike. So this entire fiasco is a complete mess and is caused by a weird interpretation of the Equality Act, which doesn't just talk about equal pay, but sort of like equal but same-ish pay, if you will, like sort of they're on the same level. But it's quite clear that cooks and cleaners are not on the same level of people who, take away your rubbish every single week. And in terms of whether it's going to be fixed anytime soon, I have heard rumblings that Rayner is currently looking at this at the moment and talking to Unite, which is the main union, talking about this, and also people at Birmingham City Council at the moment, and whether there will be some kind of resolution, because the last meeting they had apparently was very productive. So we'll see if there's any resolution to it. But I hope there is, just for the sake of the people of Birmingham. But if the government and the council and Unite don't come together and say, OK, we'll accept this pay, we'll accept that, we'll move these things around, then, the rubbish is just going to keep piling up. I mean, I think 21,000 tons of rubbish is currently piled up in Birmingham at the moment. Imagine that in front of you.
You often wouldn't know the difference, frankly. Fortunately, Birmingham is not the best managed place in the world. Two quick questions I have before Charlie jumps in here.
Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
So 2 questions I have on this relate to the prospect of it being improved in the future. The first, you mentioned the 70s there, and most people think of the winter of discontent, where the 3-day week, all the lights going off, the rubbish not being collected. That happened after the Labour government went for an IMF bailout. This is all happening before a debt crisis, which we're sleepwalking into. Absolutely. And the other is the Labour have promised a sort of Race Equality Act, which allows people to sue on the basis of if a black employee doesn't make as much as a white employee, despite seniority, despite hours worked, despite the different kinds of work, if it's not equal outcomes and equal pay, they can sue the company. That seems like an exacerbation of the strange ruling of the Equality Act that you've mentioned there. So are Labour making a rod for their own back in the future?
I think they are, certainly, but they're ideological about it, so they'll push it through anyway. They don't necessarily care about the consequences. One argument that I've hated more from sort of sensible right-wing people online, saying that the issue is not the Equality Act per se, but the way it's been interpreted and the additions made to it. It's like, no, the problem is the Equality Act. I want it thrown in the shredder today.
The system is what it does.
Yeah, it needs to go. That's the reason it happened. Same with the Supreme Court then enforcing it and causing this to happen. I mean, the Supreme Court shouldn't have any control over what Birmingham City Council can and cannot do, for crying out loud. It's an independent authority. But yeah, I mean, this type of stuff is being pushed through by not just Starmer, but Rayner. And then also you have to include things like the Employment Right Bill coming in, which is going to give put more problems not just on businesses, but on public sector employees as well. So they can have, the right to work from home, the right to certain privileges that they previously, would have just neither had, but they would have been given at the sort of expense of the employer, let's say. But now they're state enforced and you must give them, otherwise you'll get a slap on the wrist. I think that the Birmingham case is actually, it's unique in the sense that it's happening now. But let's not forget that this could happen in any area of the UK if it turned into Birmingham, how it's been doing. You see the collapse in the sort of political structure of Birmingham. You see the way in which they mismanage funds. I mean, not just with bins, but actually they upgraded their finance system recently to a thing called Oracle. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it before. It's to do with like auditing and procurement and things like that. It was originally supposed to cost about £19 million. It actually cost £261 million. And what that's meant is for the last 18 months, they've been able to audit accounts and track fraud. And as we at the TPA do every single year, our Town Hall Rich List, they haven't given us their annual accounts in a good few years.
Well, that's very reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, it's thoroughly reassuring.
Yeah. So just on this Equality Act point, I'm quite interested in this because I seem to remember another occasion where this equal pay dispute that has caused problems for local councils and it's caused them, cost them a huge amount of money. So are you able to tell us any other examples of the Equality Act being used like this?
I can't really answer that, actually. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know. I don't know specifically.
No, that's fair enough. So just from the perspective of the Equality Act, what needs to be done to actually to stop this kind of thing from happening? Is it as simple as overturning the Equality Act, or is this the kind of thing where there is so much of this kind of thing now baked into the system?
I think a lot of it is baked into the system, but you have to look where it originates from, and that's the Equality Act 2010. I think you need to get rid of that first. That's been TPA policy since the Equality Act was introduced. Get rid of it, because then what then happens is you get the embedding of these kind of things in those systems, not just in like the Westminster Whitehall state structure, but it trickles down into local government, which actually is a lot worse because there's less scrutiny around it. The only reason we're talking about Birmingham is because it's such a unique and visible case, quite literally. You don't hear about it in smaller councils who've got like insane levels of EDI or climate officers. You don't hear about, what they're doing with their money as much because, it's only picked up by the local press rather than, the mainstream press here in Westminster. This is why I think that talking about local government stuff, although it may seem boring to quite a lot of people, I think it really, really matters because this is like key examples of complete state failure. And what's the one thing that the state fails to do when it first begins to fail? They can't collect your bins.
Well, it seems like we are more interested in talking about this than the local representatives for these places. Isn't that right, Connor?
Yeah, I found it quite funny that when the Telegraph covered this, they showed a photo of rubbish as a mountain and a woman wearing a full face veil in the background. And someone objected on X, a Muslim commentator, and said, isn't it incredibly Islamophobic for the Telegraph to use a photo of a Muslim woman there? And people were pointing out, well, it's in an 80% Muslim district, so that would explain why if you took a photo on any street corner, there might be someone Muslim walking around. But, curiously, people like Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, or Tahir Ali, the MP in Birmingham, where this is happening, they seem a lot more focused on other things than bin collection. One prominent example was Tahir Ali was spearheading an initiative to have the British government lobby the Pakistani government for an international airport to be built in Mirpur, which, for those who don't know, is the region where the predominant number of Pakistani rape gang perpetrators come from. So, I mean, he might actually be serving the interests of his constituents there by building that airport, but not by collecting their bins.
No, I mean, it's not the job of an MP to collect their bins, but this is such an extreme case that you think every single MP would be on it. But I did a little bit of reading this morning, chaps, to find out what the 10 MPs in Birmingham have been up to at the moment. So let's get the two good ones out of the way. Andrew Mitchell, who's a Tory, has been talking about this pretty much non-stop. He's been in the House of Commons, he's been online, he's been on media. He's not basically shut up about it. In terms of the one Labour MP who's actually been quite good is Preet Gill. She's been very vocal in the local community. She's actually been out there. She's actually said to Unite to call off the strike and has pushed for Unite to accept the deal that Birmingham City Council was going for them. So they're the two very vocal MPs that have been on it. The other eight, not so much. You mentioned the Right Honourable Member for MIPA there, Tahir Ali, and he has been basically obsessed with Gaza, blasphemy laws, and, like you mentioned, Pakistani airports. And I did a little quick search on his Twitter account, bins, strike. No results at all. You've got Ayub Khan, who is part of he's an Islamist sectarian, of course. He's not mentioned bin once, and he's spoken about 33 times in Parliament since he's been elected, 15 times on Gaza, Kashmir, Bangladesh, and also recently pushed against Mahmood cancelling the Sentencing Council guidelines. He said that, if they were dropped, it would be really, disconcerting if those were dropped, because it's really implied that, big word. That's a big word for him. In terms of other MPs, Lawrence Turner, he's the MP for Northfield. He has not mentioned it once. He seems to be more interested in the two MPs who were banned from Israel than actually talking about what's going on in his constituency. Jess Phillips also, she's not very active on Twitter, granted, but I did have a look at her Facebook where she is more active. Zero on bins, zero on her website as well about bins on her press releases. All she's focused on at the moment is just rolling back on rape gang inquiries, basically. Liam Byrne, who's the Hodge Hill and Solihull MP, he reposted a councillor talking about bins, but again, nothing. And he's not very active on Twitter either. And I had a look in Parliament. He hasn't said anything either. Mahmood is nothing at all. She's obviously a bit too busy elsewhere doing other things.
Too busy spending 7 days politely asking the Sentencing Council to not lock up white Christian men at higher rates for the same offences as black trans Muslims.
And then trying to take credit for the overturning, even though it wasn't her.
Yeah, single-handedly, Robert General
single-handedly,
trying to force the bill through that she voted against.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of Erdington, you've got Paulette Hamilton there. She's mentioned it once, but her main gripe is gambling policy. That's all she seems to talk about in Parliament, and sits on an APPG for it, and that seems to be her main concern.
Well, someone needs to, I suppose.
Someone needs to, I suppose. And then you've got Al Carnes, who is the MP for Selly-Oak. He is when the election happened and you had all these like Labour HQ cookie cutter candidates, he's one of them.
Right.
He just says whatever Labour HQ wants him to say. He says whatever Keir Starmer wants him to say. And he's been silent on bins. All he's done is repost Keir Starmer talking about Ukraine, talking about, their plan for change and things like that.
He's like a
complete
robot. But does less interviews.
Yeah, basically, and also, peddles less nonsense about British values in inverted quotation marks. But yeah, if anyone watching in Birmingham, that's what your MPs are doing. I do know for a fact that the Birmingham City Conservatives are doing quite a lot of work on this. I mean, they've been doing quite a lot of funny stunts, namely Labour equals rats, which I found quite hilarious. Vote Labour, get rats, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's good, isn't it? Vote Labour, get rats. Yeah. They're just standing outside Birmingham City Council with a guy dressed up in a rat with a like a MAGA style hat on, saying like "Make rats great again" or something like that.
You laugh or you cry.
You laugh or you cry. But they've been pretty hardline against what the Labour administration has done in Birmingham at the moment. But the issue is they've got no chance of getting in anytime soon, even though they have been very good on this to their credit. Obviously, you have to remember that local Conservatives are not always the same as national Conservatives when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's pretty tragic. It highlights systemic rot in Birmingham. Well, quite literally rot now, I suppose.
Pretty symbolic.
But yeah, it's highly symbolic because this is the first time lots of people have seen like a clear example of state failure that they can see and smell and touch, right? Yeah. And see.
Maybe not taste.
Maybe not. If
well,
it's
let's in on it, then you're fine.
But also on the rat issue, some of the videos coming out about rats, running by primary schools and health centres, and some of them are
attacking the bin men.
Attacking the bin men. Well, when the private contractors do turn up, and they're as big as cats, a lot of them. And it's thinking, wow, like this is supposedly Britain's second city, and look what's happened to it. So yeah, I hope Rayner gets this under control just for the sake of the people of Birmingham, because no one should live like that, and no one should have to suffer because of Birmingham City Council's incompetence over the last few years.
And do you think they will?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that from what I said earlier about how some of the talks have been productive, that's usually a good sign. And one thing Labour has done relatively well since they come into power is they usually just throw money at the problem and the strikes end, which is usually the way they get the strikes to end. But also, trade unions are more willing to talk to Labour MPs and more willing to talk to someone like Angela Rayner, who is also an old trade unionist, like left-wing MP. She's not a Blairite, that kind of thing. And also seems to be pretty interested in local government and how it works and knows how badly Birmingham is run. So I think it will. Whether it's in the next few hours or the next few days, I don't know. But this has been going on for about a month now, and I can't imagine living like that. Can you, fellas? So this needs to end as fast as possible. But also, Birmingham residents are also going to be facing a 7.5% council tax increase as well, which is pretty rubbish. Just, but excuse the pot.
On the topic of throwing more money at the problem.
Yeah.
Labour don't have much fiscal headroom to do so, because after Rachel Reeves's disastrous Halloween mini-budget in October, the markets were not so keen on the various Marxist grave-robbing attempts on family farms or the prospect of raising employer-side national insurance while saying they're not going to raise taxes on working people. Yeah. And then her spring statement, which was an emergency budget in all but name, didn't quiet the markets much either, because she did, a 500 million cut on disability benefits, or was it 5 billion?
5 billion. 5 billion.
It's 500 million on
which isn't going to touch the sides, by the way, Connor.
Well, especially because they've got double that in unexpected borrowing they didn't account for.
Yes.
And then growth, fictitious number that it is, has fallen to 0.1%.
Yep.
And growth projections by the OBR, who always seem to be wrong anyway, often undercounting, if anything, have fallen by half in about 6 months. So I don't see Labour having any money to spend anywhere. What are the line items that most concern you?
I think the welfare thing is one thing that is quite scary. I mean, I'll admit, before I joined the TPA, I wasn't really involved in looking at stats and numbers. But once you work at the TPA, all you do is look at stats and numbers, and it makes your life miserable. It really does. But it's really illuminating that by the end of this decade, we're going to be spending £100 billion on disability benefits alone. That's about as much as we spend on debt interest, which is about £102.2 billion a year, which is also a huge concern of mine. I mean, it's going up by over £6,000 every second. If people are interested, TPA actually has a live debt clock, which you can watch and stress yourself out as it goes up every second, and shows you how fast you're being rinsed and fleeced and your inheritance taken away from you. That scares me, the debt and also the welfare payments. But also the issue I see is the fact that Labour will say they're in favour of growth. Labour will say they're in favour of cutting waste and then basically do the exact opposite as soon as the cameras are not on them. So for the growth point specifically, you mentioned GDP there. GDP doesn't matter. What matters is GDP per capita. That's the most important thing. We at the TPA started a project called the GDP per capita project, and we've defined a term: personal recession. Personal recession. Personal recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP per capita growth, and we're currently in one. People are feeling poorer. GDP is a magical nonsense figure which you can boost via a variety of ways, supposedly with immigration, although it never seems to work. But GDP per capita is what actually affects the living standards of people, and people are poorer now than they have been over the last few years. In regards to growth more broadly, you can't say you're in favour of growth and then hike employers' national insurance. I mean, the only way you're going to get growth is from that area of the private sector, especially small businesses. And yet they're thinking, oh, I know, I'm just going to fleece small businesses, potentially push them out of actually hiring more people or giving people pay rises or investing in other things. And then you add the Employment Rights Bill on top of that, which is just creating ever more bureaucracy on red tape on top of businesses. So it's like this weird, like who's running their comms in Number 10 and Treasury? Do they talk to each other? Because they say one thing and then do another. And on the spending point more broadly, Labour over the course of this Parliament until 2029, they're set to spend over £6 trillion. So that's make Keir Starmer one of the highest spending prime ministers in modern British history. So whenever anyone tells you, anyone on the left, the Damara media types, Keir Starmer's right wing, Rachel Reeves is right wing, they're cutting benefits. No.
You even sound like it.
Thank you. I've been working on that. Don't listen to them because they've not looked at the facts and they've not looked at the numbers, and they still live in this weird sort of Ed Miliband 2015 language of austerity, the bankers, the bonuses, that kind of thing. Do not buy it, because this government is a high tax, high spending socialist government, and anyone who says differently is just not looking at the facts or the numbers in front of them.
So I am interested, Will. I'm glad you brought this concept of growth up, because I totally agree that GDP is a nonsense, meaningless metric that doesn't actually reflect the well-being of ordinary people, because GDP has nominally grown since 2008, for instance, but actually GDP per capita has not kept pace with that so-called growth. No. Now, a concern that I have, as much as I recognise that growth in the economy, the generation of wealth, is obviously essential to having a functioning, prosperous society, there is also the concern, I think, that growth cannot be infinite, right? There has to be a point at which growth ends, right? And so, if Labour's strategy that they're deploying is not creating growth, one, what strategy should the government be employing to create growth? And two, what happens when it's not possible to grow any further?
So on the latter point, I don't necessarily believe there's a cap to growth per se. I think it obviously depends on the amount of people you have in your country, what they're doing. It depends on so many different circumstances and factors that you just can't plan for. So it's really difficult to answer that latter question. In regards to the former, like what can you do to actually encourage growth? Well, I'm from the TPA. What do you think I'm going to say? Cut taxes, cut waste, have more government transparency. But the matter of the fact is that I don't want to cut taxes quite yet until we get spending under control. Because, what's it called? Government spending accounts for 45% of our overall GDP spending. That is huge. That's proving that there's way more state involvement in the economy and just normal life, propping up multiple things than they ever have been before. And although Labour say, we're going to, what's the favourite word at the moment?
Regulate for growth?
Well, that's what Britain does. We tend to think we can regulate for growth, which is actually a word I think one of the Treasury ministers used. We can regulate for growth, which just shows how, it might have been Torsten Bell actually, but he's never seen a tax hike and he's never liked. They are genuinely. They are some of the most economically illiterate, dangerous people in regards to the economy that I've seen. And they also tend to lie about their CVs. I mean, Rachel Reeves, supposedly, Bank of England. No. Not at all. But in terms of a specific way to get things growing, you have to reverse the employer's national insurance hike. You just have to do that. I'm sorry. And then you have to find cuts in other areas like welfare, like foreign aid. Like, why are we still spending 0.7%? Well, not anymore because of the decrease in budget, although that will be going back up. So it basically still is 0.7%. Why are we spending 0.7% of our GDP on foreign aid? No, cancel that. We've got problems at home.
And just very quickly on this same topic, you wrote a piece not long ago about immigration. I'm interested in how you think immigration comes into all of this, because I don't think we can have a conversation about growth all the while we're bringing in people, the majority of whom are net economic burdens.
Yes, the ASI did something actually very interesting recently. They did a state dependency index. 52.4% of people in the UK are state dependents, and a large section of that will be to do with welfare payments and social housing. And as we know, a lot of people who've come over the last few years, the touted Boris wave, are economically inactive.
95% of visas every year, according to the Centre for Policy Studies, are net economic recipients rather than net taxpayers.
Yes, quite. And when people think about immigration and high growth immigration, you're not getting it from the places that actually do provide that kind of thing. Like the Anglosphere generally provides people who are economically active, do bring something, actually tend to earn more than the average member of the British population. But a lot of the countries that we've opened our borders to since Boris Johnson came into power, They don't at all. And the economic inactivity, especially in capital cities like London, Leeds, Birmingham, we mentioned earlier, is creating an intense level of strain on hardworking taxpayers, to the extent where hardworking taxpayers, young men like us, can't live in nice places in London because all the nice prime property is being rented out in social housing in Westminster, in Kensington, and so on and so forth, which is also costing taxpayers billions every single year. Also, you have to look at the fact of, well, if you want to pivot slightly away from legal migration to talk about illegal migration, just the cost of migrant hotels. That's just going to go up and up and up and up. And Labour said before they got into power, not that I believe them, but they said they were going to do something about it and close down these migrant hotels. Those costs are just going to keep going up. And also, to bring it back to a local angle, local councils are, spending money on their, football matches and PlayStations. The Telegraph did a really good piece about this, which I think I was quoted in, actually talking about how town hall bosses seem to be more interested in providing PlayStations than filling potholes.
Well, they spent money on, if I remember, is it Croydon Council? DJ lessons.
DJ lessons, yes, that was a fun one. There's lots of fun ones which you think are quite quaint, but actually it's not funny at all, because that's local taxpayers' cash being wasted on that kind of thing. So yeah, I think mass immigration has been a genuine failure. I think that the economic argument for mass immigration has been dead for years. But I think it's only over the last few years where people have sort of started to realise that and admit it in sort of Westminster conservative circles. Yeah. Because you have various backbench Tory MPs and Reform MPs and think tankers and stuff who a few years ago were maybe not pro-immigration, but just didn't really say much about it, and now they are explicitly anti, which is a great move. But I've always had those opinions about mass immigration, and also when you look at where I am at the TPA and what we're considering in terms of tax and spend, it's quite clear that it's not fair to ordinary hard-working British taxpayers to be funding economically inactive people when they themselves can't afford new cars, can't live in nice houses, and are struggling under the record high tax burden that we're hurtling towards.
The way to generate growth, traditionally, you can go from the bottom up or the top down, right? If you're going to do from the bottom up, you need a demographic dividend, because one way to boost GDP is to boost the population. Now, if you boost it with economically inactive people and just fudge the numbers with record migration every year, it drains the taxpayer coffers. So instead, if you look at the 80s, one of the big things that benefited Thatcher's government was that the baby boomers came into the workforce to coincide with when she came to power. So the tax cuts got the demographic boost, and so that sent her economy to the moon. It's not something we have at the moment.
No.
You could boost productivity, but nobody really knows how to do that without massive technological change. The last time that happened was with the invention of the internet. Unless AI gives us this massive dividend, which would then cause widespread joblessness, we're not really sure how to create that either. Or you can cut energy costs, which GB Energy, Ed Miliband and the like are not going to do.
No.
So instead, you could shrink the state, as you suggested. But can Labour do that? Not only do they not want to do it, they keep promising this bonfire of quangos, which the Conservative government also promised, and then they've created more quangos than they've got, including, if I remember correctly, isn't there a quango now for the efficient spending of taxpayer money?
It's the Office for Value for Money, ran by a guy who's never ran a project in his life that was on time or on budget. He was the chief executive of HS2 Limited, which isn't even built yet. Wow. He was in charge of the Parliament Restoration Committee, which Parliament's not even fully restored in any way, and he's on about £950 a day.
He sounds like the right guy for the job.
Oh, totally. Well, hilariously, Charlie, the Treasury Select Committee actually disagrees with you there, because even the Treasury Select Committee thinks he's a waste of money and thinks that, in their words, the Office for Value for Money is, in quotation marks, a waste of money. Wow. Well, that's the Treasury Select Committee. To go back to the point about Labour and quangos more broadly, because as I'm sure you guys know, it's one of my pet topics, because I hate bureaucracy, I hate the quangocrat state, and the TPA's been... we actually coined the word quangocrat, would you believe it? Whereas if you go on Wikipedia, look at quangos, we coined the word quangocrat, probably written by some, Joe Politics dark money Tufton Street, calling, hard-working civil servants quangocrats. It's like, no, actually, you're useless, you should be fired. But in terms of Labour's quangos more broadly, everyone got so excited, didn't they? Oh, Keir Starmer, he rolls up his sleeves. He likes doing that now, doesn't he? He's very David Cameron-esque, I'm fixing the foundations. I've got my plan for change. We're going to abolish NHS England. And everyone was like, wow, Britain's biggest quango is being abolished. They're all just going to move back to the Department for Health and Social Care. No one's really getting fired. Like, maybe a handful of people will lose their jobs, as Streeting admitted. But it is quite clear that a lot of this, when it comes to bonfires of quangos, people just get moved around. I mean, you mentioned the 2010 Cameron Osborne bonfire of the quangos. Their bonfire of quangos ended up costing them more because of all the compensation payouts they had to do. And also the fact that they just ended up going, there's 2 small quangos here. Let's merge them into an even bigger one. And actually, there was a fantastic Telegraph article at the time, I think in 2012 or 2013, which said that 5 out of 6 quangocrats actually ended up keeping their jobs. So there was no real reduction in the size of the state, no saving for taxpayers, no unweaving of the Blairite bureaucracy that was created because Cameron and Osborne believed in it anyway. And then they set up things like the OBR, which is now such a core part of our sort of almost constitutional economic framework now, which can hamstring governments. But yeah, I just don't buy their bonfire of quangos. I mean, they've set up 26, 27 since they've come into power. And I think that when I saw people getting excited the other day about it, I was like, hang on, fellas, let's calm down. Labour and Starmer specifically believe in this kind of managerial elitism. They believe in this kind of bureaucracy. They love it. I mean, Keir Starmer's never happier than he's sitting in front of a committee full of experts. He loves it. He's thrilled by it. So don't buy Labour's takes on this, because you're not going to get what you want at the end of the day. It's the same with same with them saying, they lied about not raising taxes on ordinary hardworking people. They lied about backing farmers. They lied about getting immigration control. Why do you think they're telling the truth about this?
Well, that was my immediate reaction when I started hearing about this, was I didn't buy for a second that someone like Keir Starmer, who is so obviously, visibly wedded to, again, what you called the kind of managerial style of politics, I didn't buy for a second that he would be cutting any of this stuff, because I think he fundamentally believes that it works. He thinks that good governance looks like setting up a committee or doing an inquiry, not for rape gangs, mind you, for any issue that might arise.
He's the civil service in an ill-fitting suit.
Yes.
Yeah, it's government by bureaucracy, full bureaucracy. That's all this government is. And they genuinely believe in this as a governance strategy. They wouldn't have announced so many quangos within their first few months of being in power if they didn't believe in it. Now, there's mutterings about them moving back on, say, the football regulator, for example, which is pretty insane as well. But again, I just don't buy it. They're just putting little things out there. I think it's mostly Morgan McSweeney and Number 10 pushing these things out there to try and throw a little bit of red meat.
He was quoted in the Times the other day as being annoyed by the OBR, saying that they got their projections wrong. And it's just like, oh, did you pick up the phone to Liz Truss in the next 24 hours, did you? Whereas Labour themselves, in a sort of retaliatory posture against Truss, had empowered the OBR with more independent power. And this is part of the problem. Even if they wanted to cut the size of the Quango state, they can't for 2 reasons. One, as you've said, the independent OBR is so entrenched as part of economic architecture that any time they go to the OBR and say, we want to make state spendings, and I asked a minister about this, the OBR says, well, we've got basically 2 years of severance pay for each civil servant. We do our budget on an annual cycle, so it won't show up in this year's budget, so there's no point doing it. No. So the state only continues to grow. And the other portion of this is that Keir Starmer's fair weather friend, but who he's turning to advice increasingly, it seems, Tony Blair, his government put the state on rails with the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act and the Constitutional Reform Act. And by enshrining the Civil Service Code into law, they can't meddle with the civil service and shrink it.
No.
Otherwise, it's politicising the civil service.
Yes, and that's always the argument that was made against sort of Cummings when he first came into power. It's like, you want to politicise the civil service. And it's like, no, I'd just like you to actually work, please. That'd be nice. I think one radical policy that I'd like to see implemented is I'd like to see ministers be able to choose their own permanent private secretaries. So what I would do is because you can't at the moment, it's picked by the Cabinet Office specifically, and also ministers, as I'm sure you know, only have the right to hire like 3 or 4 people. They're all special advisors who can, who are party political, who can come and go. And there's some, I've met some very good and worked with some very good special advisors in the past. But there needs to be a more radical reform from the top, which gives secretaries of state the ability to hire their own teams, hire their own people, clear out people who are clearly either useless or just not working in their interest or better suited elsewhere. I don't mind if, say, a civil servant gets on a scheme, is placed in an apartment they don't really like, but they can't really move around because there's no option, and then Secretary of State comes in and says, oh, well, I get you don't really like this area of policy. How about we move you over there? You'll be better over there. Oh, thank you. They move over there. But that, even though I think that's a sensible policy for a happier Britain, that one, folks, but I don't think it's going to be implemented because, again, the way in which the civil service is enshrined constitutionally by the Blairite, era, and how Starmer is carrying on that and is relying more on Blair and his mates. I mean, and look at all the old Blairite apparatchiks now surrounding him. I think the
pushing
FT
for ID cards in the last 24 hours.
God, yeah, that's just like 2006 called it wants its batons back. The digital ID thing is also quite scary. I'm a bit of bleeding heart on these civil liberties issues because I just think in the current state of things it will just be used for tyrannical purposes. Basically, they can use it as an argument for getting rid of illegal immigration, but there's various other countries which are able to clamp down on illegal immigration without saying, "Oi, mate, where's your ID license, please?"
We only have illegal immigration as a problem as well because Tony Blair, with the help of Keir Starmer as a lawyer at the time writing the textbook for lawyers, passed the Human Rights Act in 1998, enshrining the ECHR in British law and stopping us from deporting Albanian criminals because their sons like chicken nuggets. So these guys have caused the problem. You've poisoned the country. Excuse me if I don't then believe you that this is the antidote.
Yeah, and I think one thing in our circles we do have to be careful about is getting excited at the minor things that they might give us, because I see this a little bit with housing as well. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it, but it's almost like some people will forgive Labour for whatever they do just as long as they build more houses. And it's like, okay, first of all, let's talk about the quality of the houses they're building, where they're actually building them. Are they densifying cities? No, they're just putting them all in Tory constituencies in order to, punish Conservative voters. And also, they've lied about various other things. Why do you suddenly think they're going to deliver that thing? Again, it's all about the delivery and all about what they're going to do and what they're going to say. I mean, Starmer has a renewal every 6 months anyway, because he gives a big speech about his new plan for government. It'll be 2029 and he'll have like a big renewal plan for government, where my plan for change, and nothing would have happened apart from trade union bosses getting more money, civil servants getting pay rises, and the quangos expanding as it has been. But yeah, just don't take anything this current Labour government says as true. Do I want them to cut the quangocracy? Yes. Do I want them to build houses? Yes. Do I want them to cut immigration? Yes. But I wanted all the last Conservative government to do all that too, and they're supposedly right-wing and didn't do any of those, so I've got less faith of these guys, if I'm honest with you. But maybe I'm just being cynical and sceptic, folks, Tell me if I'm wrong.
One last question before we go on to a debate for our members section, which everyone should sign up for. You mentioned the Conservative government failing in 14 years to do anything fiscally conservative. Labour are currently destroying the economy.
Yeah.
Are any of the other parties offering anything more attractive? Because at the last election, Rishi Sunak, to cling on to the final few people that might be inclined to vote Tory, which is property-owning pensioners, promised to quadruple lock the state pension until the heat death of the universe, even though it wasn't financially feasible, and then sign all of us up to either go collect prescriptions for said pensioners or die in a ditch in Ukraine. I don't know if the Conservatives have changed their mind on that, and I don't know if any other parties are offering alternatives than more state spending as Labour are.
Well, it's funny. I think that's one thing that has been interesting to see how all the political parties are relatively nervous to talk about policy at this moment, which I can kind of understand. It's only a few months after the general election. I don't expect them to have a full, 5-year plan ready to implement. Let's talk about the Tories quickly first. Kemi has announced that she will abolish the net zero target for 2050. Great. You were in government. Okay, I'm sorry, you were in government. I know you weren't the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. I know you weren't the Prime Minister, and you that wasn't in your remit. I get that. And I do believe that she made those arguments back then. I think one minister described her as being permanently angry or something, which, can more moderately relate to. But that clearly is a good Conservative policy. But again, I want to see a bit more meat on the bones in the detail, abolishing net zero. And are you going to get rid of green energy subsidies? Are you going to stop giving money to, environmentalist lobbying groups? Are you going to push forward with nuclear? Are you going to do fracking? I want to see some interesting, stuff around energy policy, because we talk about growth and we talk about improving the cost of living. Again, energy is something that affects us every single day, and people feel it just as they, see their bins not being collected. They feel it when their energy bills go up, or they can't afford to turn their heating on in the winter. I think the Tories have also been relatively good on the family farm stuff. They said they revert that immediately, but my line is I don't just want the family farms tax reversed, I want inheritance tax reversed, because it's as you said earlier, it's a communist grave robbing scam, basically. You're taxed all the way throughout your life, and then when you die, I'll have 40% of that, thanks mate. And also it doesn't affect the very richest, because they've always got long-term tax planning. It affects like lower middle class, working class people, businesses the most, ordinary hardworking people who are the salt of the earth of this country. It doesn't affect the very wealthier, so to speak. That needs to go, because that would be a bold policy for Labour to implement. That would be a bold policy for Labour to implement, but they're not going to. Highly unlikely in many such cases. But so if the Tories did those two things, I'd be interested. But again, Kemi's still building up a platform. We'll have to see with the Tories at the moment. And that I've been quite impressed with some of the shadow cabinet ministers: Andrew Griffith, Robert Jenrick, Neil O'Brien, Katie Lamb at the moment. She's been fantastic. I am very impressed with a few of them at the moment. But again, still very early days for the Tories. Lib Debs, not interested in, so let's just forget them. Green Party, they're grifting communists, not interested in them either. In terms of the Reform Party, still a little bit sceptical about reform, if I'm honest with you folks, mainly because their net zero policy was a bit weird, like taxing a subsidy.
That was very strange.
Yeah, taxing a subsidy, talking about battery farms and things like that.
I wonder if that was to spite Musk, though, genuinely, because he owns the largest battery storage capacity facility wholesale in Australia, and it's under the Tesla brand. This was just after Musk said he didn't take too kindly to Farage softening his stance on the likes of Tommy Robinson and deportations, and so I wonder if that was a bit of a thumb in the eye.
Yeah, it might have been. I mean, sometimes with reform policy, it seems like it's sort of cooked up on the fly, really, and sometimes they come up with good stuff. Like their general election manifesto wasn't awful, and we gave it a decent bit of praise. Although, again, there was a lot of let's not cut lots of taxes, but let's not cut any spending, which is the real challenge for reform. Again, I know I keep bringing it back to spending, but spending's important. We're going to spend over £6 trillion over the next Parliament. Like, that is an insane amount of money. Let's think about this. Reform need to recognise that just as it's translated over to the US, there is an appetite for gutting large parts of the state here in the UK, actually especially to do with the wider bureaucracy and local government and things like that. YouGov polling consistently shows that. And actually, if welfare reforms are done right, so they don't hit the very hardest people, which is obviously a big concern of mine, that they don't hit the very people on the lower end of society, people are also pro that as well, because people do want to see genuine change and want to see their tax burden decrease, because they've got less money in their pockets and it's going, to places they've never even dreamt of before. I've paid taxes for things you people wouldn't believe. But reform needs to get a bit more serious on their spending policy. I mean, I noticed they recently came out in favour of nationalising steel, which, I can see both sides of the argument there, but I'm more sceptical about just giving, taking over from private businesses and then giving it to a bunch of state bureaucrats, because again, state bureaucrats can't run anything. Why do you think they can suddenly decide to run steel? Or giving the power to the politicians directly. It's like, do you want, a minister for steel? Like, no thanks, I'm okay, especially with that lot. So reform needs to develop more policy. I think they will be an R at the moment, but I want to see from all the parties that I've mentioned that I'm interested in, I want to see talks about real conversations about spending and not, let's shave a percentage point off this and let's shave a percentage point of that. I want to see genuine radical reform, because without it, we're just going to keep spiralling as we've been doing these last few years.
Their ability to cut spending, though, is dependent on their willingness to scrap the legislation that allows them to shrink the state. And this is something that both the Tories and Reform, maybe they might change their minds as they flesh out their policy in future, but they're unwilling to commit to. We see Kemi unwilling to leave the ECHR. She signalled that she might repeal the Human Rights Act. But she's never gone full hog on repealing the Equality Act or being an Equalities Minister. And Reform, in their manifesto, they outlined the Equality Act as something they disliked. They didn't outright say they were going to repeal it. They were going to at least reform it. But then in the recent kerfuffle with Rupert Lowe, they appealed to the Equality Act in the KC's report. So these inconsistencies from these parties make it hard to track their willingness to commit to shrinking the state, but also they haven't signalled that they understand the scale of the problem to be able to cut spending yet. Like, is that your worry as well?
That's one of my worries. I think that the scale is quite terrifying, but also because we live in a democratic system where things work every 4 to 5 years, people tend to have pretty high time preferences, and they're only considered, but what's happening in the here and now? What can I do over the next 5 years and sort of sod the long term? And I'm afraid, the long term matters, folks, because we're here for a long while, and also you have an obligation to those that come after you to make sure that the country's in a better place than you left it, right? It's not just all about you. I think that the issue, I remember one former government minister was on a podcast and he was talking about how basically we couldn't afford the triple lock on pensions, we couldn't afford our current welfare payments, and we couldn't afford our current level of spending on debt interest. And apparently the entire room just went silent, like deathly silent. And the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, said, well, you're absolutely right. And everyone was like, oh, whoops-a-daisy. But then someone said, oh, but there's nothing we can do about it at this election. And everyone went, oh, that's all right then, that's fine, move on. And it's like, okay, if that's your mindset, then you're just going to see this endless doom spiral, whether it's debt, spending, tax burden getting higher and higher, and more people are just going to consider going, you know what, I'm not going to bother working. I mean, there's plenty of young people now who, claim anxiety, ADHD, mental health issues, and are able to get onto the welfare payments because they just think, oh, I'm not playing this game, I'm just checking out. Plenty of people leave. I know multiple of my friends have left to America, Australia, New Zealand, because they're just not, again, playing the game here, because they're not getting what they think they not deserve per se, because they're not asking for free stuff, they're not asking for handouts. They're just more or less asking to be, can I make money and be left alone, please? Which, one, no, give us all your money, and two, no, we're going to regulate every aspect of your life. And until the Conservatives and Reform tap into the sort of, the social contract being broken discussion, they're not going to win people back, and they're definitely not going to win young people back. And as you've mentioned earlier with the last Conservative, their election results, I mean, you're right, no one under the age of 65 was voting Conservative, but also Reform do have that issue. I know there's a slightly bigger uptick in Reform young members, but when I was watching their conference in Birmingham, I believe, where Farage was on stage coming out on a JCB, and his big cheer line was, I'm going to restore the winter fuel payments. And I'm thinking, oh, really? It's like, oh, come on, man. Like, this is fiscal. What about fiscal discipline? I mean, even Kemi back in 2017 was saying, I don't think we should have an unmeans-tested winter fuel payment, because she was like, I meet people in my constituency who are millionaires, I get winter fuel payments and they don't need it, which is clearly a waste of money, which could be going towards other things, or just being sat in the Treasury in order to pay off our massive debt. I think that the... I'll end on a doom note. I think I've been too miserable. Sorry, chaps. I didn't mean to come here and to bring economic doom and gloom. Emigrate before it's too late.
Mr. Hitchens.
Mr. Hitchens, no. Stay here and fight, folks. The situation is never hopeless. But I do think that if Reform and the Tories, and even Labour, because they're in power, don't get serious about spending, don't get serious about the tax burden, don't get serious about the debt, don't get serious about immigration, don't get serious about the variety of issues that we've talked about today, whether it's local government reform or housing or whatever it might be, people like me are just going to think, what's the point? Mm-hmm. Why should I stay here? I may as well just leave, because I'm not getting anything, and what I'm paying for is, trans operas in Somalia and, Karim's remittances and triple locks on pensions and benefits that I will never have access to. So
it's just a calculation.
If they don't get it, if they don't sort it, they're not going to have anyone left to tax. What's the old line? Will the last person to leave Britain please turn off the lights? And if that... I can see that happening by the end of 2029. So there we are.
And if I could just ask you one more question, Will, because I think that this last part of what you were saying there is really, really important. I can't help but think that actually the system of liberal democracy that we have in Britain, the type of democracy we have, actually selects against leaders that are willing to make the kinds of changes that you've laid out today, because it does actually incur some kind of short-term hardship for people.
Yes.
And what our democracy has become, in part because of immigration, population, but also for, because of the expansion of the state, the expansion of the welfare state. It's basically become a series of interest groups who just want to vote themselves, but whether that's the pensioners or whether that's those who are living in social housing or whoever else. And so, I don't know, I can't help but think I don't necessarily buy that we are actually going to be able to vote our way out of this, because I think that for most people, it's just a calculation. Most people are going to vote in a way that is in their interest.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I mentioned the people leaving, because people, if they can't use their voice, they will just exit. They will just go, because if they think they have no control over a political system, then what's the point of them voting? What's the point of them paying taxes? Because also, what are they getting for any of it? If it's all being taken off of them and then spent on things that they don't want, and then not given back to them in any way in the form of, house building, infrastructure investment, so on and so forth. So I think that the problem here is, can you vote your way out of it? I suppose my argument would be, if you're young, you still have time and you're still able to use your voice. So join your political party of choice. Join your campaign group of choice, talk to your friends, write in newspapers, use X, so on and so forth to get your voice out there. Because actually, I think when one person stands up and has a bit of courage to stand up, 50 people then stand up, and it has that sort of snowball effect. And there has been, to some extent, I know you fellas have felt a sort of Overton window vibe shift over the last, not just months, maybe few years, where I'm sort of able to talk about things that I've thought for quite a while, but I'm able to talk about them on mainstream platforms and nobody blinks an eye. And I have, mainstream politicians talking about it. I'll just give you one quick example. I used to write quite a lot about what we now call two-tier policing and archo-tyranny. I used to write about that a lot in the COVID era, because I thought it was a perfect encapsulation of that theory. And I thought, and I was called a crank, insane for thinking that kind of stuff. Now I've got the Shadow Justice Secretary talking about two-tier policing and talking about it in Parliament in front of the Justice Secretary and calling Keir Starmer two-tier Keir. Clear Overton window vibe shift. So I do, while I was doom-mongering to some extent for cathartic effect, I do think there is some level of hope here if we just, stay the line, keep fighting, and remember that, situations are not hopeless, because previous generations have had worse traumas and worse situations and worse, tragedies to overcome, and they've managed it. So we should and we can and we need to.
One note of hope to end on is that there has been YouGov and Times polling out this week that's found that since 2018, white British men were going to church regularly at only 3%. It has now increased to 18%. Wow. So clearly there is some kind of vibe shifting. However, we're not going to have as much agreement as we did in this episode in our members section, because Charlie has requested to argue about Gary Stevenson, the day trader and the author that's been doing the rounds on mainstream media recently. If you want to watch that, you can become a New Culture Forum member. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching this episode. Please do subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we will see you the same time next week. Goodbye.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.